I'm Norina Shopland, author, historian, and specializing in doing all sorts of research about LGBT plus people from the past. So I'm going to start off because I'm chairing the rest of the session. So I'll do mine, and then everybody else is going to introduce themselves. Any questions, please to put them in the chat. Could you make sure it says all panelists and attendees so we can all see it? We'll answer the questions after everyone's spoken. So I'm just going to share my
Sorry,
screen.
Norina, there's Katie Burke in the audience who says, sorry, 1 second, please. There's 1 second, please. There's Katie Burke in the audience who's saying that she's speaking with Nick. I wasn't aware, Nick, because I didn't receive any information. I didn't know that there was another person. So would you
Sorry,
like
yes,
me,
Nick,
would you like me to bring her up?
If you could, please. Yeah, I did let Norina know.
Okay, I wasn't made aware, so
sorry about that.
That's fine. So there we go.
Right.
Okay, fantastic. So is everybody who's supposed to be on this panel here?
You think so? Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
I can disappear. Norina, how do you want me to feed you the question at the end, or how would you like this to work?
We can do both. We can have a look at the chat, and if I've missed any, you pile in, and otherwise I'll keep an eye on the chat and have a look at the questions.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye.
Right. So I'll just share my screen now. Right. Can everybody see that? Yeah. Great. Right. So I'm just gonna set the timer so I don't run over. So yes, engaging young people with history museums and archives. I'm just going to do a quick lesson plan based on some of the research that I've been doing. One of the quite well-known publications that I co-wrote was this guide called Queering Glamorgan, which looks at terminology. Of course, most of the terminology we use at the moment is 20th century. So if you want anything to research anything prior to the late 19th century, you need a whole new set of terminology. And this guide helps you out with that. If you want to find it, I'll put the links in a minute. But if you want to find it, just Google Queering Glamorgan, Glamorgan Archives, and it will come up. Don't let the title put you off. That was a research, a funding criteria, but it is applicable to anywhere in the English language. I then furthered that into this book, A Practical Guide to Searching LGBTQIA Historical Records, which is basically a toolkit for researching LGBT plus history. So what I want to do is give you a very, very quick lesson plan. One of the most common ways of researching is using newspapers. Prior to the 20th century, most of them are free. So this is just a few of the examples. And the nice thing about these is you can bring them people in as a working group in your organization, sit there all around a sort of laptop or computer, and using the glossary and the guide, have a look up for stories. And you can locate very local stories so you can engage with local people. So what sort of thing can you find? Well, this is from 1814, the local areas are Banff and Dundee in Scotland. And the search term that was used was female sailor. And quite often with these, you can find new terminology like sex was discovered. Now, this is one of these things that I call a matchstick story. It flares up, you never hear about it again. This is an individual who worked as a female sailor for 5 years on board ship, who went under the name of William MacDonald. Now, obviously that's an alias and it can be difficult to find them. So if we have no more information about this individual, what do we do? Well, we can go down the local archive and we can have a look at Captain Lyle, see if you can find anything more about him, about the ship, the David and Jean that was built at Banff. You can look in the museums. What sort of ship was it? Is this a big ship? Is this a small ship? This individual lived for 5 years. How did they live for 5 years on board a ship and not be identified? Look at the clothes they were wearing. How did they manage this? So even though you've got this very small story, you can build up this quite large narrative. This is another one from 1838, your local areas of Manchester, Bawtry and Sheffield, search terms up the top. And this concerns Henry Stokes, who cross-lived for 25 years. and was a master bricklayer and was married to a woman. And again, you can expand your research around this article by going into museums and archives. What did a master bricklayer do? What clothes did they wear? What sort of life did they live? And so you can expand it into this much larger picture. Once you've got your stories, you can use them to celebrate, obviously, in all the LGBT plus celebratory months. But look also outside, because what we're trying to do is inclusion. We want inclusion in wider history. We don't want everything to be set in LGBT History Month or Pride. So we've had a story about a female sailor. So let's, share that story of the Day of the Seafarer, International Women's Day, International Workers' Day. We've got somebody who's a master bricklayer. So let's talk about them on International Workers' Day. As I said, we want more inclusion, not being constantly separated out. And then what do you do with them? Well, you can do all sorts of things. Get people to write poetry. You've only got these very short stories. So you've got, you've built up an image now of a much larger, what their life is like. Short stories, pictures, songs, the artists, music, all sorts of things. So you're only bound by your imagination. So that's just a very quick sort of off-the-cuff lesson plan where you can go down to archives and museums with a tiny, tiny story and build it into something much, much bigger. So that's basically it. So there's my email if you need it. So I'll put it in the chat in a minute. So thank you very much for that. So now we're going to go straight to Amy from the London Metropolitan Archives.
Morning, thank you, Dorina. I'm so delighted to be here this morning with everybody and to be included on what I think is going to be an excellent panel based on Noreena's presentation there. So from sort of single story down, I'm kind of going the other way. So I'm Amy Taylor and I'm the Learning Engagement Manager at London Metropolitan Archives, and I'm going to just share with you today 2 online resources that we have that you can use to lesson plan in the classroom. So I'm just going to share my screen with you all. I'm hoping you can now all see that. Give me a nod. Great, brilliant. So brilliant. I'll just move you guys so that you're not in the way of my notes. So for those of you who don't know London Metropolitan Archives, we are the principal archive for the Greater City of London and Greater London area, and we house a collection that dates back to 1067, and that document on the screen you can see at the top is our first document there, which was the Charter for London. Over those 1,000 years, LMA have amassed a collection of books, maps, photos, documents and videos which tell the story of London, and I must stress here, all its Londoners. So our collections are wide-ranging. They cover all aspects from social care, parish records, business records, just to name a few. We're housed physically in Farringdon, so you can come and see the archives. We are open for bookable visits, but you can also access a whole host of resources online via our research catalogue, our picture archive and our YouTube, and I'll share all of these links in the chat with everybody after the presentations. So to move on to the 2 resources I just want to talk about today. The first one here is Speak Out London. This was a project that LMA worked on in about 2016, 2017. And what we wanted to do was recognise the rich contribution of LGBTQ plus histories to London. So we set about collecting and collating ephemera, personal memorabilia and oral histories from a self-selecting group, and these are now all available on the Speak Out London website. So there's 30 oral histories and around about 150 items of ephemera, and on the screen for those of you who are need a visual description, there is a selection of archival material and a number of images of the speakers who were involved in the oral history collection. So edits of these oral histories are freely available online, and they're all catalogued and fully searchable under things such as campaign, arts and entertainment, health, identity, law, places and politics. Moving on from this resource, there's another resource that's also widely available online, and this is the Haringey Vanguard project. This is a project that I worked on with Veronica McKenzie, who I believe is speaking at the conference. This project went a step further from Speak Out, and this time we looked specifically at the contributions of BME, LGBTQ Londoners from about the 70s through to the early 90s, and we focused specifically on Haringey, which was a radical left council at that time. Again, on this site, it's fully searchable. There are around 150 archival materials and around 30 oral histories. The full versions of these are all available on site at Bruce Castle, which was our partner on this project. And again, I'll put the link to all of these resources in the chat. So now we know what these resources are, how would we use them? So I've just put a kind of list here of the sort of main topics and themes that are available through listening to these oral histories and looking at this material, and an example of some of the archival material that we've been able to collect. Again, just a brief description of one of the images on the page. There's some lovely handmade drawings of real families, families with 2 mums, 2 dads and children. You know, wide-ranging topics from religion and being LGBTQ, HIV and AIDS, discussions about gender and sexuality, culture, heritage, identity, being LGBTQ. And I think one of the things I want to stress here is the kind of importance of using that first-hand oral testimony. I think that's really vital in terms of enriching learners' experiences, you know, hearing firsthand about things that perhaps they have only previously seen in books. So a really rich resource to use here. And so my final slide really is, once we know what we can learn, how can we use it? So again, I've just given some suggestions on the left-hand side here. Constructions of LGBTQ timelines or histories, interview skills, discussions about oral histories and who's left out of records and why. I think, again, what I would say is this is just a springboard. LMA has lots of resources. The Haringey Vanguard website actually has a lovely section on learning that was produced by Lila, who's organised the conference, and that's a really good place to springboard and start from. And if you want any other advice, then me and my team are really happy to help, and you can always drop me a line. So the final slide is just some of the links for some of the places that I've spoken about today, but again, I will pop all of these in the chat, so no need to worry about scribbling them down. I think that's it for me in my very tight 5 minutes. Norina, I hope I've managed to keep time, and I shall pass back to you. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much indeed. And we'll go straight over to Marina.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. Hope that this comes up. There we go. Hopefully you can all see that. Can I have a thumbs up, Nick, as soon as I can see you? Brilliant. Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Marina and I work in the learning team at the Museum of London. Hopefully you can see behind me. It's quite obvious where I work. The Museum of London tells the story of London from its inception until today through a really vast collection of objects relating to everyday Londoners. As a social history museum, we use objects to investigate, encapsulate and reveal the really diverse stories of those who have lived, worked and passed through London across time. And I'm here today to showcase some of the resources we've put together, which do exactly that. So for those of you who are visually impaired, I'm showing an image on the screen of a young person who's peering into one of our museum cases, and hopefully you think they're looking extremely intrigued. Now, I've changed the slide to show our web listing from our early 2020 advertisement for our LGBTQ+ schools tours. So back in 2019, we collaborated with our visitor experience colleagues to create this tour for Key Stage 4 and 5 students, based on our public queer city walking tours. And to do this, we consulted with critical friends from Stonewall and from Just Like Us, who are a UK-based LGBT+ young people's charity, and I think Emma presented yesterday. And together we examined the language, the breadth and the real inclusivity of the tour and piloted it with 4 secondary aged groups during LGBT+ History Month in February 2020. Now, these tools were really a product of a shift in our thinking around our secondary schools programme towards more actively including multiple and diverse audiences. We want to be inclusive and accessible in all that we do, in the hope that this will enable students to develop their knowledge while connecting on a really emotional and empathetic level with the past and with our vast collection. Again, for those of you unable to see the slide, I've put a summary beside a photo of a group of secondary school students who are enjoying a session and expressing genuine delight and surprise, I would say. Now, as with many archives and museums across the whole globe, the pandemic affected the way we worked entirely. The pandemic plus feedback from those pilot tools I mentioned, consultation with our teachers panel and a change to the UK RSE, that's Religious and Social Education Curriculum, back in September of last year, led us to take a totally new approach. And we decided to select objects from those LGBTQ+ tours and use them to inspire a suite of downloadable resources which can be used by secondary teachers in the classroom. And this is what I helped to launch back in November of last year. Now, the free online resources we've created are for secondary school teachers to use to ensure that LGBTQ+ lives are included across their teaching. They can be used in form times during PSHE lessons, or even embedded into subject lessons across the curriculum, things like English literature and history. And there are several parts to the resource. First on the slide, we can see a screenshot, actually it's the previous slide, of our A4 colourful timeline, which includes some landmark events in London's LGBT+ history and which can be displayed in the classroom. Secondly, both our consulting teachers and our critical friends from Just Like Us highlighted the importance of explaining the language we use, particularly terms like queer, which we have used in an academic sense, but which we do recognise has a loaded meaning given its derogatory origins. Our handy frequently asked questions document helps teachers to support their students in addressing some of the really difficult questions around LGBTQ+ history, and we hope that's in an appropriate and critical way. And we do this by including definitions and explanations about the language we use. This document also delves into why some LGBTQ+ lives are more difficult than others to unearth in archives and in our museum collection specifically. And this includes LGBTQ+ people from Black and minority ethnic communities. Now, finally, 5 short object studies form the core of these resources. And we have screenshots of 3 of these on the slide. They range across time periods and disciplines and span from Ethel Smythe, who was a famous British suffragette and a composer who had numerous relationships with women, to the tragic story of the Roman Emperor Hadrian, the same one as the wall, and his young male lover Antinous. Now, each of these resources also includes a simple lesson starter, which is designed to use object-based inquiry to stimulate real critical thinking amongst students in the classroom. And the activities included are very simple, adaptable, and broad enough that they can apply to multiple lessons or subjects and different age groups. We really hope that the cross-disciplinary nature of these objects...
Marina, can I interrupt you and hurry you along a little, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just finish. Basically, they're cross-disciplinary. They range from music, religious study, and they really support teachers to diversify their planning. And this has been a very whistle-stop tour of our resources, but you can find them at this web link, which I'll also post in the chat. And they also provide further reading and ways to explore our collections more. Thank you. And I think I'm passing over to Nick and Katie.
Indeed. Nick and Katie, you're on. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. While Katie just shares the screen, I'll introduce myself. I'm Nick Collinson, Interpretation Assistant at English Heritage and founder of the LGBTQ working group there. For a few years now, I've been wanting to put together a queer tour at Rangers House in Greenwich, where we've identified some queer objects based on the blueprint by the V&A and the British Museum. Now, when I returned from furlough last year, we were encouraged to utilise a team of young producers, part of the Shout Out Loud initiative.
And I'm Katie Burke. I'm a master's student in queer history at Goldsmiths, and I'm one of these young producers in the Shout Out Loud initiative at English Heritage. Shout Out Loud is part of the National Lottery Heritage funded Kick the Dust programme, whose aim is to get the voices of young people into heritage organisations. So the young producers are the team of volunteers between the age of 16 to 25 at the heart of Shout Out Loud.
And it's the existence of this dedicated team of young volunteers that inspired me to, or enabled me to start the project, really.
Yeah, and Rangers House is home to the world-class Verna collection, which features several objects that connect to queer history and mythology. On the screen, I'm showing a few pictures of some of these objects. We have a statue of Sappho, a bust of Anne Seymour Dharma, and a dish that depicts the myth of Diana and Actaeon. We're going beyond traditional interpretation of these objects, though, to find out what they mean to LGBTQ people now and throughout history. So this project has three key outcomes. The first is for young producers to research, to write, and to critically peer review.
Katie, could I just interrupt you very briefly, please? We've got a blank screen up.
Oh, okay, no problem. It might be that the images I've picked are very high resolution, maybe too high resolution to see. I'll leave it on the screen. It might be that they load in slowly. If not, no problem. At least I've described them.
Yeah.
So the first aim of our project is for the young producers to produce the tour, which will be delivered by the on-site team as an ongoing offering. We're also producing a leaflet to act as a physical keepsake of the tour, as well as creating additional digital content, which allows people to engage in the project with these different ways, depending on their personal preference.
So involving young LGBTQ people between the ages of 16 to 25 helps to make this project relevant, dynamic and accessible to a critical audience of queer history and heritage. Not only are the young producers able to give advanced and innovative insights into the kinds of queer stories that young LGBTQ people are looking to see, but I've also been struck by a consistent dedication to accessibility and diversification of content. We'll also be testing out the tour's content with queer youth groups in July to assess the impact and relevance to other queer young people.
Alongside the tour and the digital content, we've contracted the queer illustrator Andrew Ahern to design a leaflet to accompany the guided tour, which organising that gave myself and the team experience in writing a design brief and selecting a designer based on their creative response. And Andrew's art style is loud and proud, and his enthusiasm and engagement with the project has been really prominent from the start. He's used bold and cheeky representations of a voguing Queen Caroline and Saint Sebastian, who are featured on the tour, to bring our objects to life. And his design really captures the fresh, dynamic spirit of the project. So I'm really excited to see the rest of the work that he produces for us.
Our content will be digitally available as well in an edited form via QR codes in each room, and the team is developing additional materials including short articles, blog posts and social media films, which people can engage with if they want. We're also recording audio material on the objects so that people who can't attend the house in person for any reason, you know, geographical, cost, accessibility, whatever, can still hear these stories being told by the people who have written them. And by doing this, we're putting the personal stamp of the young producers across our various outputs, allowing their focus to really shine through the project.
We're looking forward to debuting the tour on the 19th of this month for some invited members to correspond with Pride Month. And while negotiating with ongoing COVID-19 restrictions has been a challenge, we're looking forward to carrying through the momentum through to 2022, when Rangers House will be able to give guided tours again. This project, I think, is so important, not just for Shout Out Loud and English Heritage's institutions, but for the queer community, and particularly its young people. For young people, knowing that places like English Heritage are actively engaging with LGBTQ history is empowering, and will hopefully inspire other heritage initiatives to retell these histories that have been overlooked.
Katie and I are both beyond excited to see how the Rangers House Queer Tour will go down. We have a soft launch in a week and the final launch in September in time for Pride in London, just showing a picture of Rangers House here on Blackheath. So do come along and check it out. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick and Katie. And we'll go straight over to Izzy.
Hello. Hi, my name is Izzy and I am the Digital Learning Officer at Leeds Museums and Galleries. And as part of my role at Leeds, I manage mylearning.org, which is a website that hosts learning resources for teachers. So I have a short presentation I will share with you now. So I'll just get that going. So on the screen, hopefully when it comes up, could I get a nod, please, Katie? No, thank you. On the screen is the homepage of My Learning. And we have a carousel on the front, which shows our new learning stories. So everything on My Learning comes from arts, cultural and heritage organisations from across England. It's all national curriculum linked, so we cover the whole curriculum, key stages 1 to 4. Learning stories are text, so information, images, videos, might have interactives, documents, and there'll be discussion and activity ideas as well. So I'm just going to talk through our strategy for how we are improving our content on LGBTIQ+ subjects. So it's a 3-stranded strategy. I'm going to go through the 3 very briefly here and then have a look at each one. So the first one is we are developing discrete LGBTIQ+ themed resources. Secondly, we're developing stories of LGBTIQ+ people in history. And thirdly, we're including content of LGBTIQ+ aspects as part of a wider story. So what do each one of these mean? So for the first one, discrete LGBTIQ+ themed resources. An example of this that we have on My Learning is our learning resource on section 28, the criminalization of teaching about homosexuality in schools. And on the screen is an image of a button badge, which says unintentional promotion with a pink and black triangle on it. And unintentional promotion was actually a charity set up by some university students in response to section 28. This resource was created in collaboration with MESMAC, which is one of the oldest and largest sexual health charities in the country, and they are based in Leeds. And this is a key stage 3 to 4 resource. So we're looking at secondary school. So for the second strand, stories of LGBTIQ+ people in history. An example of this on My Learning is Anne Lister of Shipton Hall, and on the screen is a portrait of Anne Lister. This resource was created by Calderdale Museums, and Shipton Hall is part of their collection. And this is a key stage 1 to 3 resource, so it's for younger pupils. And with the resources where we're looking at people in history, we're looking for people whose sexuality was integral to their story. So we want our resources to be authentic and not a diversity tick box exercise. So for the final strand, we're looking at LGBTIQ+ aspects as part of a wider story. So this circles back to what Narina was saying about embedding it across the curriculum. So an example of this is our Leeds United Football Club men's resource. And on the screen is a picture of the lanyards that LUFC created for the 2018 Pride in Leeds. This was written in collaboration with LUFC. And in this resource is a chapter on inclusion, and within that is information on their LGBTIQ+ fan group marching out together. And the content for that section actually came from the fan group themselves, so we got in touch with the community. So it's really nice to have community content on the site. And this is a key stage 2 to 3 resource, so upper primary, lower secondary. So those are the 3 strands of the approach that we're taking. So where do we go from here? Well, we're going to continue with this. We've used this approach to start to improve our women's history content on the site, and it's been working really well over the year and a half. It's an ongoing. Everything on My Learning is always ongoing. We're going to continue to target all key stages, so key stage 1 to 4 that we cover, so that every child has the opportunity to see themselves reflected in their lessons. We actively approach external organisations to seek content from them who have collections that support these stories. So peeps that are on here, I'm going to be in contact with you. And we also will be looking into our collection at Leeds Museums and Galleries. So we have over 1 million objects at Leeds. We have plenty to work with to create some more stories in our archives and collection. So I just want to leave you with this tweet. So I will describe this as a screenshot. So I tweeted out about our section 28 resource to let teachers know that we had it. And this was a response that I got. This made my day. So this person quoted the tweet about our Section 28 resource and replied, "I welcomed Section 28 because if someone had taught me about homosexuality in a positive light, then obviously it would have turned me gay. Thankfully, I was taught other, more important stuff. I am now King Henry VIII, and one day I hope to be an Oxbow Lake." I just thought that was a really good response to people who protest against inclusion within the national curriculum. So thank you very much for listening. mylearning.org, please do check out the website. I'll put links to those stories in the chat. We are on Twitter at mylearning_org, and my email address is at the bottom of the screen, which I can share as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Izzy. Love the tweet. And last but not least, Lois.
Lovely, thank you everybody. And as the teacher sitting on the panel, I have just been scribbling so many notes and so many things from everything you're saying, because as a history teacher at a rural high school just outside of Norwich in Norfolk, UK, lots of things you said there have just sparked loads of ideas in my mind, so thank you so much. I'm not going to share my screen, I'm just going to talk with you. So when I realised I was going to be speaking on this panel, I put a tweet out. And I put a tweet saying to UK secondary school teachers, asking them a question. And the question I asked them was, do you include LGBTQ+ history in your Key Stage 3 curriculum, so for 11 to 14-year-olds? And I had 260 votes on the tweet, and 41% said yes, 59% said no. And that sparked in my mind, why are our secondary school teachers in the UK in subjects like history not all including LGBTQ+ history? And for me, there were a few reasons. Number one, is it because of a lack of confidence? Is it still that hangover from the Section 28 clause that we had in this country that didn't allow us to do it? Are there still some people who were either students at that time or teachers at that time saying, can we actually teach this stuff? Are we allowed to be teaching this stuff in schools? So that was one of the reasons I thought about. And then another one is, maybe subject knowledge. Because we weren't taught this in schools as pupils ourselves, do people have the subject knowledge to teach LGBTQ+ history? And my answer to that one is, if you don't have the knowledge, you find it out, just as you would do for any other thing that you have to teach in the curriculum. So what I want to do is just share a few ideas from kind of a practitioner, a teacher perspective as to how I've started to try and include LGBTQ+ history into my lessons. The first thing is why is this so important? We have, as educators, a moral obligation to ensure that our students see the journey that groups of people have gone on to get to where we are today. They need to understand the struggle. They need to understand the events that led us to where we are here in 2021. And for me, I think there's three key ways that we can do that as educators. Firstly, curriculum design and changing your curriculum can sometimes be a bit of an intimidating thing. If you've been teaching something for a long time, you're confident, you're comfortable with what you're teaching, suddenly going, you know what, let's rip this up and let's change everything, is intimidating, and workload wise isn't always practical. Therefore, we need to think about the existing units we're teaching and where we can bring in examples of LGBTQ+ history. So I'd imagine most secondary school teachers who teach history in the UK teach the Tudors at some point. And they teach about Henry VIII and his wives and Elizabeth I and the changes in religion in Tudor England. Why not have a think about, actually, when you're teaching Henry VIII, teaching the 1533 Buggery Act that criminalised sex between two men in this country? Why not teach the origins of that act, why it was put in, and the longevity of it? And actually, that could be something that doesn't have to take a whole lesson. It could be an extra into a lesson that sparks off some thought in students' minds. So actually adding LGBT history organically into what we are already delivering in the curriculum. The second thing is actually, I think it's really important that we move to every secondary school in this country having a specific unit looking at the rights of different groups of people, whether that be linked to race or disability or sex or gender identity or LGBTQ+ history. And actually, I think the importance of understanding that journey and actually how recent this history is. and how current the changes still are and how it's still ongoing. So actually, I think encouraging every secondary school in this country to have a unit on LGBT plus history and how it has changed in the 1900s, the key events, making it international, talking about the Stonewall riots, talking about Section 28, talking about the HIV and AIDS crisis, and actually educating young people in our schools about these key events and having it as a standalone specific unit where they can then look at the intersectionality of LGBT rights, race, sex, disability rights. I think that's really key. And that's something we have at the end of year 9. I'm currently about to start teaching it. So to our 13 and 14-year-olds, we are currently about to start teaching that unit. And it's something that I want to develop and make a lot bigger over the next few years. And then my last point is this idea of the storytelling, the individual stories that you can include of the key people who have made significant changes. So talking about Alan Turing, talking about Marsha P. Johnson's role in the Stonewall riots, talking about Stormy Delavari as a gender non-conforming person and her role in the Stonewall riots, I think is really, really important. So actually having those 3 strands of where can you add it in to what you are already teaching? Where can you include a standalone unit so students understand the changes and the struggles for LGBTQ plus people in the country where you're teaching? And then also thinking about the power of individual stories and the role of individuals. Now, all of the resources that you've heard about this morning are absolutely fantastic. They're great places to start. But if you are thinking about your own subject knowledge and you're thinking about maybe your subject knowledge on LGBTQ plus history is at a low starting point, or there's people in your department that you've got great knowledge, but they need a little bit of information. They need to improve their subject knowledge. Something for me, which I found really, really powerful, and it's really accessible to students as well. So you can have this book in your school library, is Amy Lame's book, okay? From Prejudice to Pride. And it's a really great book. So I'm just holding up on the screen here. I'll pop it in the chat in a moment, the title of it. It's a fantastic book and it's really accessible to students. There's timelines, there's stories of key individuals, there's loads of ideas that you could bring into your teaching. So
Lois, can we wind up quickly, please?
Yep. So my final point to secondary school teachers in any country is be bold. Include LGBT plus history in your subjects areas, and you will see high levels of engagements from students. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much indeed. And I think one of the things that's been commented on is how fascinating all those talks were, and people are learning a lot and being able to take it back and put it into effect in their own work. I'm going to start with a question from Nick Jones, who wants to organise an outing with our LGBTQ plus youth groups certainly to the English Heritage venue, and wanted to know how to do that. But in terms of a wider question, what can you offer people in local areas who maybe have got LGBTQ groups and are looking, and maybe a couple of you could just say what, just if somebody wanted to quickly come into your organisation, what you could show them and do for them? Amy, should we start with you?
Yeah, I'm really happy to jump in there. So there's a couple of things. It depends on your kind of learners. If it's schools, then we do offer kind of bespoke school sessions where we do a sort of brief intro into LGBTQ histories. That's organised with my colleague Simon. And what we do, our kind of strength there is that we have all these. There's some of the documents that I was showing on the screen earlier. We have the originals of these. So what we tend to do is we will get out a selection of original documents, and then we will use that as a springboard for kind of conversation and teaching. So we are at the moment we're doing those remotely, but we're hoping to obviously have those back in person come sort of September, October time. And for a kind of older youth group angle, we also run our LGBTQ history clubs on a Wednesday evening, and they're free, they're open, they're pop along. So if you've got kind of students of that age you want to encourage just to come along more informally, then that's an option as well. And as I said, just drop me a line on LMA Learning and one of the staff will get back to you with what we can offer.
Great, thank you very much. Anybody else like to say anything?
I'd just like to add that we are looking for youth groups to attend Rangers House in Greenwich on the 18th of July for some very small scale research. It's nothing too involved, but we just want to basically test it out and see what they think. So if anybody here is watching who has any contacts, do get in touch. My email address is in the chat.
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'd also just like to add, when you were talking about local groups, and so people who aren't in London will be able to engage with the project, because we're trying to host a lot of additional material on the Shout Out Loud website, including blog posts and articles that expand on the things covered in the tour, and also sort of audio descriptions of things on the tour. So we're really excited. We think that digital content is like a great way of providing that accessibility, especially for people who it might be unsafe or not feasible for them to travel to an LGBT explicit event. So I'm really proud of that.
I think that's a good point, because we see a lot of these big names about Leeds and London, and people may get the idea that all these archives are in the big cities and everything. But archives do include a lot around the country. Maybe, Izzy, I mean, you know, you're the Museum of London. What sort of other information do you have about areas outside London?
Was that for Izzy?
Oh, sorry, Marina. So
Yeah.
sorry, Marina. I forgot who was who then.
So our collections that are on our website and the resources I mentioned, they are specifically focused on London. But we do tend to work, so at the moment we're in a bit of a flux because of the pandemic, and because our the learning department has currently undergone a real restructure. So we're, like I said, we're kind of relaunching what we're doing, we're relaunching the way we're working, and we are trying to work with more community groups, work with those outside and inside of London, but our key focus will always be in inner London, really. But certainly we have the museum development office, who are based at the Museum of London, but they have a much broader remit, and they work with organisations across London, but then there are other elements of that who work across the country as well. So we do have connections with other organisations, but very much for the Museum of London, our focus is the city.
And sorry, Izzy, with Leeds, sorry, not London. Anything you'd like to add?
Well, with my learning, so my learning is Arts Council England funded, so it's non-profit but managed by Leeds Museums and Galleries. So, but all our content comes from arts, culture and organisations from across the country. So, and everything on my learning appears equally. So we have stuff from the smallest volunteer-run museum and archive up to the nationals, and everything has fair treatment on my learning. So we are totally open to working with those small organisations, or ones where they're trying to get their learning resources out, and perhaps they don't have the platform for it. So yeah, we will welcome those. The other thing we've got in the pipeline is London School of Economics. We're working with to do a new resource on the first trans pride. That's in the pipeline, coming up in the next month or two.
Great, that's really interesting. Just a note to everybody, there's quite a few comments in the chat. If you want to keep it, if you right click in the chat and click on select all and then copy and paste, you can keep it, because there's lots of useful links and comments there. So we've got a comment from Sue Sanders. Check out the Bishopgate archive. The Bishopgate archive is full of absolutely wonderful resources, LGBT plus resources, and lots of history books and free resources. A wonderful resource done by the Norfolk youngsters on how to queer museums and look at sensible footwear, and cartoon books on LGBT history. The question, what do you think is the most important issue that we need to consider when we're presenting LGBT plus history? What would you say was the most dominant theme in your work in getting the word out, as it were? Anybody like to? Nick? Go on, I can see you're thinking, Nick.
I was thinking, but I'm not saying there's much there. Let's, I mean, I don't know. I think probably the main thing that comes to mind is that it has been hidden. Not necessarily hidden, but ignored for all sorts of reasons, and it hasn't been spoken about, and we need to really kind of redress that balance. That's what I would say was the main thing.
Anyone else?
I would just,
okay,
oh, sorry.
go ahead, Izzy.
No.
I was just going to say, I'd go back to what Lois said about teacher confidence and also support from SMT in school. So I used to work as a classroom teacher, and it was really homophobic environment, and the SMT did nothing about it, and it was awful. And I actually taught in the last place where Section 28 was in force. I did put a big rainbow on my wall as the first thing I did when I got the job there, when nobody did anything. So I think they were just ignoring it, but that's what they did. So I do think that teacher confidence and buy-in from SMT is crucial.
Yeah. I was just going to echo that. Actually, I think for me it's been really interesting having kind of all these museum professionals on here who are sort of desperate to readdress this balance in this hidden history, and we have it, and you know, to actually be on a panel with a teacher who's saying, well, this is how I'm thinking about weaving it in. And I think you know, we try to have a dialogue with schools, but perhaps it's kind of not enough, and more kind of institution school-led conversations to try and just, you know, work out how best to present this stuff so that it can be sort of woven into schools, because I think that's, you know, it's there, we have it, let's use it.
Absolutely. Anyone else?
Come in there on that. So I completely agree that the kind of the collaboration between the museum sector and then the education sector, kind of uniting that, is so important, because as teachers we have 100 balls in the air at all times, juggling around all these things that we're doing. And when we strip things back, the crux of why we are in the classroom is to educate our young people and to give them a broad and rich experience. And so therefore the more collaboration that we can have, and also like the simple quick wins, this doesn't have to be about immediate overhaul of curriculum design. If we can have these simple quick wins, these kind of drip feeding of things that we can put into our curriculum, because curriculums should always be adapting, they should always be looking to be developed. And actually, if we can have those quick wins, those things that we can add in really instantly, and then over time look to broaden our curriculum, and have a wider range of resources, that's so important.
Absolutely. Anyone else?
I think what Lois just said is really important, but I think it also has a lot to do with exam boards and the way curriculums are actually written, like across, as Izzy mentioned as well, and we've tried to do throughout all of our resources, they need to be cross-curricular, and these kind of links to LGBTQ plus experiences need to be across the board, and it needs to be normalized and just needs to be mentioned in every subject, not just, I know obviously Lois said about teaching it in one unit and teaching about civil rights and the development of those in the 20th century, but you can't just teach that in isolation, it needs to be across the board.
I think your point about exam boards is really important. That all the curriculum development that I have any control over is between Key Stage 3, our 11 to 14 year olds, and then we are so constrained. And I think therefore as teachers we need to realise that freedom that we actually have with our 11 to 14 curriculum, and really be bold with those changes that we are making there, where we have that element of control.
That's great, thank you very much. I understand our time is up. Lila, can I'll bring you back in here.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Narina. You've done a fantastic job. And I've been so inspired to see so many museums and galleries and places around the UK and London specifically, having this drive towards making their collection more inclusive and intersectional. I'm really inspired, so grateful. I think this is just the beginning. I want to thank you all so very much from the bottom of my heart for dedicating this Saturday morning